Welcome to episode 55 of the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast, clicker training, horsemanship, liberty, tricks, and FEI dressage with Georgia Bruce. I'm not sure exactly when I first came across Georgia, but at some point I was probably curious in clicker training and a quick Google search on clicker training horses in Australia, and Georgia Bruce's business, Click with Horses, is the first to come up. And what a clever name that is. I really like Click with Horses. I don't know, I just like play on words for various things. And I think, she's really taken clicker training with horses to a really high level. I have watched a lot of Georgia's social media videos and have even had an online lesson with Georgia where she has helped me with some flying changes preparation and shaping ideas. And I know that Luke Thomas, the clicker training cowboy that I've had on the podcast before, also thinks extremely highly of Georgia, and it was always in my plan to get her on the podcast at some point. So who is Georgia? If you haven't heard of her, Georgia Bruce is an equine behaviour consultant with the IAABC, International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants, a level 1 dressage judge and qualified dressage coach with Equestrian Australia. She has ridden successfully up to FEI level in open dressage and has represented Australia on 12 occasions, including the Tasman Challenge in New Zealand, the Dutch Open, twice at the World Para Dressage Championships, as well as the 2004 Paralympic Games in Athens and the 2008 Paralympic Games in Beijing, where Georgia won 2 bronze medals riding the 18-hand-high gelding victory salute. As well as performance horse training, Georgia also enjoys teaching horses liberty and tricks. Her passion is animal learning, training, and behaviour analysis, and she began using clicker training with horses and other animals in 1998. Georgia loves empowering horse owners with the knowledge and skills to build positive relationships with their horses and achieve their training goals. She believes the future of horse training is the artful combination of modern behaviour science, ethology, and biomechanics together with the wisdom passed down from the old masters in horsemanship and dressage. In this episode, we discuss Georgia's broad horsemanship journey from humble beginnings, representing Australia 12 times, competing internationally in dressage, and training Rumba the Wonder Horse to do all the Grand Prix movements at Liberty. All things clicker training and positive reinforcement, what it is, the benefits, the magic of the clicker or the marker, and how Georgia uses it in her training today. When Georgia does use pressure and release, aka negative reinforcement in her training. Common mistakes people make when using clicker training, examples of shaping behaviours for performance horses, for example, riding a shoulder in or riding a complete dressage test that has been trained with positive reinforcement. How to keep food anxiety low when building duration of behaviours, how to get started with clicker training, all the usual fun horsemanship breakthroughs questions, plus so much more. I love that Georgia has a really broad experience using different training approaches, which gives her a unique, balanced, and open-minded perspective when it comes to horse behaviour. She is very humble, extremely knowledgeable and talented, and personally, I like that while she loves and encourages the use of clicker training and positive reinforcement, she's not extreme in her views and doesn't seem judgmental of those who use negative reinforcement. I really like the way Georgia is able to break things down and explain things so clearly and simply, and really views horse training through that kind of logical scientific lens, which really sits well with me because I like to be able to really understand the nitty-gritty and the why things are working the way that they are. And I know Georgia doesn't see herself as disabled, as you'll hear in this episode, but I think it's so inspiring to hear about everything that she has accomplished despite not having full use of one of her arms. I think at times training horses we can feel clumsy and uncoordinated, and the fact that Georgia is able to use all of the regular equipment plus the clicker and administer treats in a highly effective way, it's very impressive and inspiring. I have a lot of respect and admiration for her, and I think she's one of the best clicker trainers in the world, so I know you're going to love this episode. So let's dive in with the incredible Georgia Bruce. Welcome to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast, a source for riding and training insights with the goal of helping your horse be a light, happy, and willing partner. I'm your host, Amalia Dempsey, a mainstream equestrian rider who discovered natural horsemanship and equine learning theory, and now I help riders like you achieve connection and communication with your horse so you can have more fun and fulfillment whilst prioritising the partnership. Get more learning resources, including my free connection and communication mini course at amaliadempsey.com. Click the follow button so you don't miss an episode, and if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave me a rating and review or screenshot this episode and share on social media. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, Georgia Bruce, to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So excited for this conversation. Let's start off with, can you tell us about your horsemanship journey to date, from when you got into horses to what has led to what you're doing today?
Okay, so my mum had an interest in horses, and she worked in the racing industry. She actually worked doing track work for TJ Smith, who was one of the top Australian racehorse trainers in his day, and that was when Gay Waterhouse was learning the ropes. So so I got my love of horses from my mum, and because I was born with one short arm, I've got no radial bone in my right arm and no thumb on my right hand due to aerial spraying of Agent Orange while my mum was pregnant. So because of my arm, my mum, she wanted me to get into horses, but she was worried about, how I would go with, holding the reins and all that sort of thing. So she was interested in teaching me about the Western riding, because she'd seen riding with one hand and that sort of stuff. So she really instilled in me a love for the horses and the respect for the horses. And it wasn't until I was 12 when I actually saved up, and I actually worked as a extra in the mini-series Ocean Girl, and I saved up $500 from that, and I bought my first horse, and his name was Dan, and he was a quarter horse because Mum had thought that I'd be able to ride him one-handed. But he actually came with a few issues where he mostly wanted to go backwards, and then when you tried to get him to go forwards, he wanted to buck me off. And like when we went and tried him, he was really quiet. But then, once I got him home, we had all these issues with him. And that sort of started my journey towards learning about horses, because, Mum thought, maybe he's not suitable, we should get rid of him. But of course, I loved him, so I wanted to keep him. And so that was when I learned everything I could about horse training, and I got really into horsemanship. When I was about 15, I had a big operation on my shoulder, which meant I couldn't ride for a year. And so I just basically did everything I still could do, which was working with horses, with my horse at Liberty, and some of my friends around the area with their ponies, they sort of brought their ponies around and they wanted to learn about the Liberty, and so we'd sort of just experiment with it, and I'd see what I could do with like one arm still in a sling. And so I sort of got interested in the Liberty quite early on, and I was doing, quite well with my horse, getting him to do all different things. And so a few other people started, wanting lessons. And so I started sort of doing little lessons when I was about 16, just helping local kids around the area. And eventually my shoulder got better. And so I started sort of taking on some of their horses to help them out with some training. And so I was, trying to learn everything I could about training and how to help these horses, and I just loved it. I just loved everything to do with, learning and training and, horses. They're so beautiful. And then I got this mare called Crystal given to me to train and to sell on, and She was an Arabian cross Andalusian, and she was very sensitive mare. And she came with a lot of issues and a lot of trauma that I was a little out of my depth in learning about retraining Crystal. So anyway, I did a lot of horsemanship type things, and it was actually with Crystal where I found the clicker training. That was in 1998, and with my friend down the road, we were both really into training, and we would go down to the local arena called the Ross Common, and we'd work with our horses. And one day she told me about this clicker training that she'd found online in one of these forums, and she'd taught her pony to fetch with it. And I thought that was really cool. And I could already get Crystal to do all kinds of things like Liberty, and I could ride her without a bridle, and different things, but I didn't know how to do any tricks. And I thought, that looked really fun and Crystal might like it. So I had a bit of a go, and sure enough, I taught Crystal to carry a basket and smile and Spanish walk, and just loved it. The training with the positive reinforcement and the clicker, the marker signal, just really seemed to make sense for Crystal. And at the time, my friend Jill and I, we were both doing the Pirelli natural horsemanship levels. We were doing our level 2. And we both got stuck at a stage where you had to teach the horse to do flying changes. We both had quite sensitive Arab type horses, and we'd done all the things in the course, and nothing was really working. These horses were still getting a bit too anxious for our liking, and they weren't really getting it. And I think Jill had the idea about, well, why don't we try and use the clicker to help teach them the changes? And so we did that. We at the time we weren't using clickers because I couldn't get a clicker. I had I don't know if you remember those little beetles you used to get in like a party bag when you go to a kid's party.
Oh, I don't know, but I've heard of people using like the top of like those glass jars. I don't know what, I suppose the lid of the glass jar. Yeah, they make a little poppy noise as well.
I used those as well, and put a little hole in the side of it and had it around our wrist, and they were good as a clicker. So ended up teaching Crystal to do the flying changes because she had so much more clarity about what I was asking. She would canter around, and I'd ask for the change, and then she'd eventually change lead, and I could click and stop and give her the reward. And it was just like it all suddenly made sense to her what I was actually asking for. So it was like a real light bulb moment for me, going, wow, she actually understands what I'm asking her, because when she hears that click sound, she knows she's done the right thing. So from there with Crystal, I just ended up basically using the clicker training with everything that I was teaching her. And I just found that she learned everything so much faster, and I could just shape behaviors so much more easily, and I'm sure my own training skills improved and progressed as we went along. And I actually trained Crystal up to do dressage, because I thought, she was that type of a horse, I should try dressage with her. And we did really well, and that was around just before the Sydney 2000, and the Paralympics were going to be on in Sydney, and people asked me, you should try out for the Paralympics in the dressage, you'd probably qualify. And it was a little bit confronting because I didn't really see myself as somebody with a disability, but I apparently did qualify. So yeah, I thought it would be a good opportunity to learn, really, to progress my skills with horses, and to maybe ride different horses and then train with different instructors. So I did go down that path, and I'm really glad that I did, because I ended up traveling all over the world. I was on the Paralympic squad for more than 10 years for Australia, and
wow,
represented my country 12 times, and did 2 Paralympic Games. I did Athens in 2004 and Beijing in 2008. And won 2 bronze medals in Hong Kong or Beijing.
Amazing.
And at all those events, we rode borrowed horses. So like I did 2 World Championships as well, and the team would fly over to Germany or somewhere, and we would train. We'd be given a selected horse, and we'd have a few weeks to try and form a bond with the horse, and learn about the horse, and see if we could bring the best out in each other, and attempt to do a dressage test on a world stage with a horse that we hadn't really known that long. So
oh my goodness.
Doing that on multiple occasions all over the world, I think it really taught me a lot about horse training and riding and communicating with the horse, and also just seeing the way that horses are trained and ridden around the world, how there is kind of a standard system of cues that are used with horses, with halters and lead ropes and bridles and leg aids and all that sort of things. Doesn't really matter if you go to Germany or England. The horses sort of understand a similar language with people, and
with those horses, how were those horses selected for you? Did you get a choice, and were you able to use your clicker training, or did you have to follow their, I'm guessing they were probably already using negative reinforcement in their training. How did that pan out?
Yeah, really good question. So at the time, I was experimenting with the clicker training with my own horses. But, back in those days, nobody was using positive reinforcement with horses, or maybe there was like a very fringe outer community, a very small outer community that might be experimenting with it. But certainly no one was openly using it in the competition industry with dressage horses. And so, I was training under a national coach and, together with the horse owner. So I had to ride the horse the way they wanted that to be ridden. And obviously I was as gentle as possible with the horses and tried to form a bond with them.
Of course.
And I just found that I thought to myself, wow, if I could just use the clicker and the positive reinforcement, I could get this so much faster, this connection with the horse, and have them understand and have them motivated. So I felt like, it was a little bit struggling to do things in the old paradigm, but I did learn a lot in the process as well.
And
sorry.
Horses were selected for you, or did you?
They were all selected for us. So often, like, the team manager would go over to the country beforehand. Like when we went to Belgium, they would have been there a few months prior and gone around to various places, and different people would loan their horses, which was amazingly generous of them, looking back on it all.
Yeah, for sure.
So and so they would select the horse. So I was at that stage, I was what we call a grade 4. I competed in the grade 4, so that was like the lowest level of disability. So so I had to do like a medium advanced test equivalent of EA. and for our freestyle, we could do up to Prix St George. We could do like 3 and 4 times changes and half pirouettes in the freestyle. So to be competitive, you sort of needed a horse that knew those things, but it was also very difficult to get a horse trained up to that level and have somebody, loan it to you and that. So often the horses that we loaned were more like elementary levels, so not quite as highly trained.
Wow. And you're riding them levels up essentially.
Well, the team test and the championship test, they were like medium level. So yeah, we would have to do a bit of training with them in a few weeks and see if they were, if it was going to be okay for them to do that. And yeah,
wow, what an experience.
Yeah, I think definitely doing that, for such a long time, it really taught me a lot with the horses. I got to train, under some really fantastic coaches. I went to Germany several times. I trained for 6 weeks with Hubertus Schmidt, and he is really one of the modern masters, I think, in dressage. And watching him every day, training horses from prelim up to Grand Prix, and seeing the systems of shaping that he used, and I really enjoyed that, and just getting access to lots of top level coaches and learning, training through various movements on a variety of horses. It does give you sort of a bit more of an understanding of how to train all those sort of dressage behaviors. So I did that. I was also competing in open dressage. I competed up to Prix St George in open dressage with several horses. One of them was my little mare Crystal, and another one was an Arabian stallion that I rode for the stud. His name was Prince Rashid. I actually trained Rashid with the combination of the positive reinforcement and the classical dressage, because the owner was open to that. She was like, I don't mind what you do. If you want to, campaign him for us, that'd be great. So, so I actually with him, I qualified for the, for Hong Kong, for the Beijing. So, and I did my Equestrian Australia coaching certificate, and I lived in southeast Queensland for a few years and worked for a warm blood stud there with Matti Samani, and that was a fantastic experience, because Matti is really another master. She's very understated. She would take on like stallions that had severe behavioral problems and help them to sort of become good citizens, basically. Or she'd help people with really quite dangerous horses, and I saw a fair bit of that while I was working with her. And she would also have me help her start the young warm bloods under saddle, and she had an amazing
training, or still mainly negative reinforcement, or a bit of both.
So she had an incredible understanding about horse psychology and the ethology and the biomechanics. She really understood that, and she also saw what I was doing with my own horses with the clicker training, and she could see how that was really beneficial. So she did actually let me incorporate the clicker training into the starting of her young horses, which was really fantastic. And I trained one of her young horses as a 4-year-old and took it out to a competition at the CDI in the young horse classes. And in the young horse classes, you do your first test, and the first test is like 3 horses all go around together, and then out of, there's all those different sections, and then out of that they pick out a few horses that do an individual test, And then in the final stage, the judge rides the top 3 horses.
Mm.
And so my horse, his name was Lorendal Galaxy, or Spider. And I'd clicker trained him all through his starting under saddle. And when the riding judge tried him out and rode him, she said, wow, this is the softest, most responsive young horse that, you know, she'd ridden. So she actually bought him.
Wow, that's a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, he was a really beautiful horse as well, like really beautifully put together, and, you know, a lovely temperament, and yeah, a wonderful horse. But just, I think definitely the clicker training had a big impact on, you know, how much she liked him. And yeah, I did that quite a bit, of the starting young horses, and then, you know, having to sell them because I didn't own them, and it was always a hard part of the whole thing. I never was really good at that. I got so attached to them. I just love every horse so much that I work with that, yeah, I wasn't really suited for that end of the business.
Yeah, it would be hard.
And then so I got into, yeah, after Beijing, I more or less had a break from all the competition. I'd been doing that for so long. I was a bit burnt out by it. And I had seen a fair bit in the industry of, you know, because I worked in show jumping stables and lots of different dressage stables in Australia and overseas, and saw some fantastic things, but I also did witness a fair bit of cruelty and a fair bit of pressure. And, you know, I sort of questioned a lot about whether I wanted to be involved in that. And so I actually didn't ride for a little while there, and I just did my liberty and my tricks, and, you know, had fun with my horses. And that's really when I started getting asked to do a lot of clinics and travel to do clicker demos. And there was probably 10 years where I basically drove up and down Australia doing clinics and demos and lessons non-stop. And yeah, didn't do quite as much on the competition side for a little while. But yeah, I found it, my passion was teaching people about positive reinforcement. And you know, I just saw a horse's eyes light up, you know, when they first encounter the clicker training and the positive reinforcement, especially if they've had a history of, you know, a lot of pressure or trauma. And yeah, I just loved it. You know, they become enthusiastic and willing and motivated, and they're like consciously participating in the training instead of training something that's happening to them. I was really motivated for a long time to really promote the positive reinforcement. And yeah, fast forward to 2023, I'm still going with it, really.
So cool. And you've got more of your own horses now that are all clicker trained, that you do liberty and a bit of dressage, I think, as well.
Yeah, I've still got I do liberty. I've got Rumba the Wonder Horse, who he's mostly retired now, except for little games and things. But yeah, he could do all the Grand Prix at liberty and without a bridle, and as well as lots of different tricks. He has several viral videos of his like sleepy time one where he tucks himself in with a blanket, and
he's kind of famous.
Yeah, so he's still going strong. And with him, like, I just play little clicker games, and, you know, just it's basically enrichment and bonding. And I've got another horse, Joey, who he's an 11-year-old warm blood cross Anglo-Arab, and I bought him initially. Well, somebody asked me to break him in, and I reluctantly agreed to, and initially planned to sell him on, to train him up and sell him on. So I did end up buying him, but because I'm no good at selling horses, I, of course, just fell in love with him and kept him, and ended up, I did a bit of dressage with him. We competed quite successfully up to elementary level until COVID, and I haven't done any competitions since COVID, but he's going really well, and we have a fun time, and I just enjoy shaping the dressage behaviours. He's learning piaffe and passage, and training towards the flying changes. So yeah, he's a lot of fun, and I might go and compete with him, but I don't really mind whether I do or I don't, because I sort of did a lot of that. I just love the training, but yeah, I probably will compete with him again at some stage.
Yep. So just enjoying the journey at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a couple of other young horses as well. So yeah, just enjoying the journey really, and enjoying teaching and helping people, with their horses and form.
I feel like you're so humble about all these achievements. Like, not many people can say that they've basically represented their country over 10 years, 12 times, that they have a horse who can do all the Grand Prix movements at Liberty. Like, these are incredible achievements. So yeah, I'm blown away. And I'm curious to know, after, that whole journey that you've just described, how would you summarize your training approach or philosophy with horses today?
Oh, thank you. My training philosophy, I guess, it incorporates modern behaviour science, the principles of, learning theory, also ethology and the instincts of the horse, as well as biomechanics, how they move, and the functional movement patterns that we learn through dressage. I'm also influenced by the wisdom that's been passed down from the old masters in both horsemanship and in classical dressage. So they're sort of my influences. And I do follow mostly the principles of Lima, the least intrusive, minimal aversive. I like my horses to enjoy it as much as possible, and I want the training sessions to sort of be enrichment for the horse, where it's not just an ego-based thing of using them as a piece of sports equipment, where it's more like a conversation with the horse and their willing participant.
Yeah, for sure. And I think many of the listeners of this podcast will agree with that. But I feel like some people perhaps haven't come across clicker training, or don't really know what it is, or are confused between what clicker training is and positive reinforcement is. Would you be able to shed some light on the definition and how you use it in your training today?
Yeah, so positive reinforcement, the technical meaning for that, positive is like in maths. So when it's like adding something. So in operant conditioning, we have, we call them 4 quadrants, and there's positive and negative, and they're talking about things that are added or removed from the training equation. So with positive reinforcement, we're adding something into the equation. And in the operant conditioning quadrants, we've also got reinforcement and punishment. And the definitions of those is a reinforcer is something that strengthens or increases the frequency of a behavior that precedes it. So positive reinforcement is adding something into the training equation to increase the frequency of a behavior. And by contrast, punishment refers to something that reduces the frequency of a behavior. So people often get confused by the terms, because the scientists decided to use positive and negative, and we already as humans have these ideas about what positive and negative mean. So rather than using it as something added or something subtracted, people often think, oh, positive means good, and rainbows and love hearts and butterflies, whereas negative means bad. And it's not really like that. It's just something added or something taken away. And so what was the rest of the question? Sorry.
I suppose what makes clicker training? I mean, it's kind of obvious for you and I, but I remember at the start, I was like, oh, what's the difference between clicker training and just positive reinforcement? Or what does the clicker actually do? Is the clicker magic,
Yeah. Good question. So the clicker actually marks a behavior. So let's say we're asking the horse to step backwards. We would use the clicker. It's almost a good way to think of it is like a camera. So you're taking a photo of the behavior that you want. So with the clicker, when the horse steps backward, when their hoof is actually in the air swinging backward, you would click and mark that moment. And then, and then you would follow that with giving the horse something they want, such as the food reward. And I think using a marker signal is really part of the power of the clicker training, because it just gives the horse so much clarity about exactly which behavior we're looking for. So the sound of the click is also quite short. And I should have had a clicker in here with me, but it's a really short sound. So you can mark like the flick of an ear, or the height of a stride, or a moment of a when the legs change in the flying change, or a slight change in their posture. Like you can mark a really precise moment of behavior by using the click. Technically, it's called a bridge signal because it bridges the moment in time between the behavior and the getting of the reward. And the start of clicker training is all about pairing the bridge signal with the reinforcer. So you'd basically click and reinforce so that the horse starts to associate the sound of the click with the food. A bit like with Pavlov's dogs, how they rang a bell and then gave meat powder, and rang a bell and then gave meat powder, and then pretty soon the dogs would associate the sound of the bell with the meat powder. So it's the same with the click and the reward. So definitely using a marker signal allows us to really clarify to the horse what behavior is being rewarded. Whereas if you just use food rewards without using a marker signal, let's say I'm asking the horse to step backwards on the ground, and when the horse steps back, then I give them the food. So what you're actually reinforcing is the horse reaching towards the food, because that's the behavior that comes the moment before them actually eating. So with a reinforcer, it's about what happens before the reinforcer. So that's what's important to the horse. How did I get that? And that's why horses get pushy, or we call it mugging, when people train with food. There's thousands of people all around the world that go, oh no, you should never train with food because your horse will get pushy. And that is true if you train with food without a marker signal, because if you're training with food without the marker signal, the only behavior you're strengthening is reaching out for the food.
And also perhaps if they don't train those initial, I guess you could say, ground rules, in terms of you don't receive the treat unless your head is in this sort of position.
Yeah, exactly. So so with the click you can do that. Like that's the first thing we do, is teach them, you've got to have your head away from us with your neck straight and then I'll click and take the food to you. And that teaching them the food manners is so important. But you can also do things like using the clicker, because it's that bridge signal. Like I'll have my horse 20 meters away at liberty, and maybe they're trotting and they do a nice elevated stride of trot, and I can click and mark that moment of that trot stride, and the horse will stop and wait for me to come over and give them the food, and they'll know that it was for that trot stride. Whereas I couldn't do that if I was only training with the food without the marker signal. So
and you couldn't do that really if you weren't using positive reinforcement at all, because you wouldn't have a way of marking that behavior at that much of a distance just by scanning and capturing, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the positive reinforcement. It just changes the whole paradigm with the horses, and it gives you so many more options. I mean, there are some people that train behaviors, and they call it purely with positive reinforcement, where they barely touch the horse. They're using all what we call a target, where the horse reaches towards something and touches it, and or prompts with different obstacles and that sort of thing, like maybe a mat or so it is possible to train lots of behaviors by capturing and shaping it, where we gradually change the standards for a reward. And you can do a lot of different behaviors without using any pressure and release. So that's really cool for people that want to go down that path of training without any pressure. I certainly do that with quite a few behaviors. I love capturing and free shaping behaviors. Lots of different liberty things I've taught with that, and quite a few tricks, and even some of the dressage type collected work. I do that with the free shaping. I also, given my dressage background and horsemanship background, I do train behaviors with very gentle pressure and release in combination with the clicker training.
Yeah.
And I think with traditional negative reinforcement, so mostly that is like pressure and release. So let's say you push back on the lead rope and the horse feels the pressure on their halter, and then when they step back, they get that release of pressure. You release the pressure on the lead rope. So that's the pressure is removed when they step back. So the behavior of stepping back is hopefully strengthened. And next time they feel that pressure, they're more likely to step back to get that release. So that's the traditional way of training with the pressure and release. And in the traditional training community, there's a lot of, starting with very gentle pressures and then escalating. Some people escalate quite a lot, or they might use a lot of pressure on a horse, which is, not necessary to use strong aversives, especially when we use what we know about shaping, which is just rewarding the slightest try, and also with the incorporation of clicker training.
Yeah.
So I find that, like, if I was going to teach a horse, if I was going to use combined reinforcement, say for that same behavior, I could press back on the lead rope, and then instead of waiting for the horse to take a full step back, I could really watch the horse, and even if they just shifted their weight slightly back, I could click and mark that, release the lead rope, and give the horse a treat. And just repeat that. So I could start with the lightest pressure, where the horse, is aware of it, and they're not finding it at all like stressful or painful or anything like that. It's just they're just aware of a very mild feeling, and it sort of guides them into how to find the reinforcement. And then so I use that pressure as like information to help the horse find what behavior I'm going to click for. So instead of just doing it to avoid the pressure, it ends up letting the horse know how to earn a food reward. And so when we're using shaping, and we are shaping in really gradual increments, the horse, they just learn so much faster, and they're also motivated. They're like, hey, if I lean back and I get this little bit of carrot, what if I step back? So they'll sometimes offer more, and you can go, hey, that's great, jackpot. So when you're training with pressure and release, horses don't do that. They offer the minimum, like the least amount they can do to be left alone. Whereas with the positive reinforcement, they'll start to do, oh, well, you think that's great. Well, watch this.
And that's something I found as well. The things that I have trained with positive reinforcement, they're behaviors that my horses are willing to offer me at other times. They're like, hey, look, I can do this. And that can be good and can be bad, but I don't really see behaviors that are trained purely from negative reinforcement performed in that same way. So it's kind of cool that they're like really engaged and exuberant about the behavior. But some of the objections that I hear about using clicker training or positive reinforcement, and I'm sure you've heard them as well, is, well, I don't want to be using treats forever. I can't do a dressage test and stop and give a reward halfway through. And I want the horse to do it for me, in quotes, not for the reward. What are your thoughts on those objections?
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of questions in there. So firstly, we train a behavior. At first we get the behavior happening, and then we shape the behavior. So let's say we're teaching a shoulder in. So at first it's just, shaping the idea of a shoulder in, and maybe it's just putting their nose in and we click and treat, and then we can gradually progress to getting the whole actual positioning of the shoulder in and the softness in the body, and then we can shape that further so that we can get more and more steps in the shoulder in, and then we can shape that until eventually you can get like a whole long side in the shoulder in, and then once that shoulder in is really good, you can train that even with distractions where they're listening, where you're really happy with all the elements of it, where it's it's a really good shoulder in and it's really consistent and reliable. Then I put that on a variable reinforcement, a variable scheduler reinforcement. So then I don't need to reinforce the shoulder in every single time I ride it. I might start to go, that shoulder in was really good, and now let's go out of that into a travers and click that, or so I might not click the shoulder in every single time I ride it, but I definitely will still reinforce it sometimes, and that way the horse is always keenly participating, going, well, maybe this time I'm going to get the click and the reinforcer. And that's how poker machines work. So,
and they're highly addictive.
Yeah, exactly. So the horse, they become really keen, and they want to keep trying just in case this time they're going to win the jackpot, so to speak. And so I don't think about going to a competition, like I don't compete at a level that I'm training. So I want to be training a level well above what I'm competing at, because when I take the horse out to a show and there's all those distractions around, I want to be sure that my horse is going to be comfortable and they're going to be confident and able to perform those behaviors, even with the distractions. So if we're training a level above what we're competing, then all those behaviors that we're asking for at the show are really well-known behaviors, and they're all on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So, going around and doing a test should be, no big deal at all. And I will always have a little jackpot at the end of the test when I walk out, and, I'll give the horse something really good. And does it reinforce the test? No, but I guess it's a little bit of positive reinforcement in that environment. And
counter conditioning sort of the whole process. So for example, let's say doing an elementary test, each of those components or movements in that test have previously been shaped using the positive reinforcement, but that are now on a variable reinforcement schedule, and to the point where you've built up enough duration that you could do a whole test and the horse doesn't need to be rewarded as such in that test, but you'll still give them a jackpot at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And also within the riding of the test, there are a lot of moments of releases where, I'm not going to be using any kind of strong pressure by any means. My pressure should already be, very light if I'm asking the horse to go out into that, distracting environment and perform. We should already have, really nice responses to very light pressure cues. But there are little tiny releases, little encouragement with my reins, where I might, even just touch the horse on the neck, and those little tiny signals that will let the horse know that yes, you're doing a good job. And yeah. So there's other reinforcers present.
Yeah, of course. And going on from the objections that people have with positive reinforcement, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people using with positive reinforcement?
So one of the first mistakes I would say is not having some guidance or help when you're getting started. And so what people tend to do when they're on their own is teach a really fun trick, which may be Spanish walk or something to start with. And instead of teaching those foundation behaviors like, standing quietly out of my space and waiting for the food. And so if you don't have any guidance and you just leap in and start training behaviors, then you don't really know how to get behaviors on cue. And so the horse will be offering the behavior all the time, like super excitedly. And you also won't have any food manners established. So the horse might be a bit grabby with that. So definitely I would say get some guidance. There's lots of different resources out there of getting your horse started with clicker training. I've certainly got some free videos online and an online course, and there's lots of other people out there that can help you as well. Some of the other things I would say is using reinforcers that are too high value. So some horses, when they're first starting clicker training, they're so excited, woohoo, I can earn a carrot. So you might get just a little bit too much motivation than what the person was ready for. And so in that case, it can help to start off with a lower value reinforcer, like maybe pellets or chaff, and also make sure the horse has had some food before your training, so they're not hungry, so they're not as super excited. Another thing I would also say is that, and this is a really common one, where I see people really focus on the stationary behaviors a lot in the initial phases, but they don't focus on any movement. And so then when they've got this really strong reinforcement history for lots of stationary behaviors, and then they start asking the horse to move, and the horse is quite reluctant to move because they think, no, I've got to stand here and eat. So luckily behavior is malleable, and you can always, change that and shape and start reinforcing movement. But every behavior has its counterbalance, its opposite, and you need to think about sort of training in pairs. So if you're training, a lot of turning to the left, for example, you need to balance that out with a lot of turning to the right. Otherwise, the horse is going to want to turn left all the time because that's the way that's been reinforced. And it's the same with like the stopping and the going. If you've only trained a lot of stopping and not reinforced much going, then for a little while the horse might be like not as keen to go because that hasn't been reinforced as much. And
it's a balance.
Yeah.
And what has been your biggest horsemanship breakthrough to date?
Breakthrough, well, I've had a few health issues, and so I have fibromyalgia, on top of my other physical challenges, and it's not so much of a breakthrough, but I think when you have physical issues, you just get even better at setting up your environment so that the horse might be likely to offer the behavior that you're going to be looking for. And also just shaping things in much smaller steps and learning, different shaping strategies for different behaviors. I really love that. I love, learning how, what shaping process somebody used for a particular behavior. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just like everyone else, experimenting and trying to keep up to date with everything that's coming out in the research world, and yeah, just enjoying my horses at the same time.
Love that. That's what it's all about. And what do you think makes a happy horse?
Well, I guess we can never really know how they feel. I think Susan Friedman talks about that a bit, about we need to be careful about using labels like happy. We can only make assumptions based on, does the horse look comfortable? Has it got all its physical needs met? Definitely we can look at their body language. I think people focus too much on the ears. Obviously, the ears are important. But for me, I look a lot at the body tension. I think, a relaxed horse who's performing with more, should I use a label, joyful type movement, is going to be one that has a relaxed, loose, swinging body rather than tense, tight muscles and facial expressions and those sort of things.
Yeah, it's true. Like, we'll never know for sure exactly how a horse feels, but I guess they can give us clues through how they're moving and some aspects of their body language. But I agree, I think people can get a bit too focused on one area, such as the ears, and especially because that's such an obvious thing to look at. You see it in Liberty videos and things, and very much draws the eye in, but you've got to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And also to understand the environment, like, people definitely, a swishing tail can be a sign of, a stress indicator. It could also be an indicator there's a lot of flies there. So I think we need to not jump to conclusions too much with things where, obviously we see the whole picture, but yeah, sometimes there can be other elements at play that we might not be aware of.
Absolutely. And what's something that you wish that every horse owner would do differently?
I wish they would use more positive reinforcement.
Of course.
And use a clicker. And just break behaviours down into much smaller steps.
Yeah. One of our listener questions was, is it okay to sometimes use the clicker and sometimes not, or is this confusing to the horse?
Well, definitely the horse would probably prefer that you use the clicker and the positive reinforcement, but you certainly can. Like, there were times when I was training for dressage and I would have to have a lesson with a national coach or something, and they would, give the lesson, and obviously I wasn't allowed to use the clicker at that stage with the horse, and so they would tell me, you need to work on this, this, and this, and then I would go away, for a week and clicker train my horse to work on that and that, and then I'd come back the following week and the instructor would say, gee, that's so much better.
Did you tell them you were using clicker training in between sessions?
Yeah, I did eventually, and most of my instructors definitely got on board that the clicker was useful just by the results that it was getting with the horses, but some of them ended up going on to use it themselves and others didn't, but yeah, so I'd say definitely you can. Obviously you need to be mindful about how you go about it and what behaviors you're working on.
Yeah. And another listener question is, what do you do to build duration in a behavior whilst keeping food anxiety low? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So it's about the schedules of reinforcement, really. And one of the traditional strategies is gradually increasing the length of time before you click and treat. I found, though, that's not the most effective way because the horse can get a bit frustrated and not quite sure. I found the easiest way to increase duration is to use an intermittent scheduler reinforcement. So that's one way. So let's say I'm asking the horse to put its head down. And I want it to hold its head down for longer. And at the moment, what the horse is doing is it's putting its head down for like 1 second, and then we click and treat, and the horse puts its head up because the click ends the behavior. So someone's trying to get the horse to put their head down for longer. And so with intermittent reinforcement, it's not just longer and longer and longer. I don't wait like initially 1 second and then I click and treat, and then eventually 2 seconds and click and treat, and then 3 seconds and click and treat, and 4 seconds and click and treat. It's more like 1 second, and then, you know, maybe 2.5 seconds, click and treat, and then maybe the next one is only half a second, and then maybe the next one is 2 seconds, and then maybe the next one is 1. So it's just varying it a lot more, and it's coming back and throwing some easy ones in there so that the horse is like, oh, maybe this will be an easy one. Oh, hang on, maybe it wasn't. Click. Oh.
Yeah.
So
do
that
you
way.
use an intermediate bridge as well? Like a keep going, or
I don't tend to use a keep going signal so much, no, but I know other people do. I tend to just have my criteria, and but the other thing I would suggest with adding duration would be increasing the number of repetitions. So like if you're training a bow, horse to bow, it's, you know, you can teach them to go right down onto one knee, and then we click and treat. It's quite a challenge to teach them to bow and then to stay down there for longer. But what I've found is, so if you can first of all get them to bow, and they're obviously really good at it, and they've got the history of reinforcement, and, you know, the behavior's going really well, then you can actually go ask for the bow. And instead of clicking, they hop up, because like they've done the bow, they hop up. You ask for the bow again, and then you click and reinforce the second repetition. And then you keep doing that, and you keep reinforcing for the second repetition. And what happens is they start to bow, and then instead of coming all the way up, they'll just come halfway up, because they know that second one is like what's going to be reinforced. So then they bow down again, you click that, and pretty soon they start to bow and then hardly come up at all, and then again do the second one, you click that, and then after a while they just bow and they stay down there, and you're like, yeah, click, jackpot. Bonanza.
Yes, that makes so much sense. You've just given me an idea on how I can get more duration in the school halt that I'm currently shaping. So which is obviously quite physically challenging for them to hold for a longer duration. So maybe I'll start rewarding on the second repetition.
Yeah, that can be a good strategy for that one.
And if you could have dinner with any 3 horse people, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Well, I think I'm not sure about that one, really.
I suppose you've already trained with some amazing people around the world. There's probably not too many left that you sort of need help from.
Oh, no, there definitely is. But I probably would like to talk to one of those, maybe like Xenophon, or one of those guys from, you know, back in history, where they did all the classical dressage and the movements, and just to see what their thoughts and philosophy was back then.
Yes.
I'd also probably be interested in more having dinner with like B.F. Skinner or someone like that did all those,
some behavioral scientists,
operant conditioning kind of studies with the pigeons. And I know that's not a horse trainer, but I think still, you know, yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
And my third one, yeah, I'm not sure. Probably a dressage rider. Maybe Hubertus Schmidt. I would have liked to have spent more time with him and talked to him, and I would have loved to have seen what he could have done with the clicker.
Yes, true. Because I feel like some of those trainers that already have excellent timing from a pressure release sense, it doesn't take them long to pick up really good timing with a clicker.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this next one is a bit of a fun question. What has been your best horse-related purchase in the last 12 months?
Oh, okay. Well, definitely, I've got to think of what it's called now. The paddock blade.
Oh, yes. I've seen the ads for those.
It's really good. So, yeah, much less time spent picking up manure means more time with horses. And, I just drag it behind the ride-on mower. And although it wasn't so good when it was raining, that was not a success because it was muddy and didn't work. But now that it's dried out again,
I've wondered how it would go on hills as well, because we're on quite a hilly property, and I'm like, would the paddock blade go okay on the side of a hill?
I think it would, but you need to have like a quad bike or something suitable to tow it. And it's mainly just about not having too many like bumps and huge rocks and things like that. So it's sort of smooth-ish.
Yeah. I'll have to put it on my wish list. And do you have any favorite horse books or resources?
Well, it's not a horse book, but I would definitely recommend Karen Pryor's book, Don't Shoot the Dog.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a critical piece of literature in understanding animal learning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
I had a feeling you were going to mention that book. I have read it, but it's pretty, what's the word? It's not a long book, but it's dense, if you know what I mean. Like there's a lot of information to take in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
it's a good one to come back to.
Yes, you could definitely keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
Any others, or is that your main recommendation?
I also quite liked Tom Dorrance, I think it is, True Horsemanship Through Feel.
Yes.
I think that's a nice one.
Mm-hmm.
And Dressage in Lightness, that was a good book as well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Great. I'll add those to the list. I have a list of all the books that people on the podcast have recommended. So I keep adding to it as we get more people on the podcast.
Oh, cool.
Now, you've achieved amazing things with horses so far, but I'd like to know, what is your ultimate goal with horses?
I just like having a good time with them, really.
Yeah.
I think I've done a lot of things, and I've trained behaviors that I wasn't sure if they were possible, just to see if I could do them, and
Mm-hmm.
and I've done the competition thing a lot. So I'm more now just I like finding different ways of shaping behaviors. I experiment with, last time I trained the Piaffe like that with this horse. Well, what about with this other horse? I'm going to try and shape this a bit differently and see if this is, better or worse, or how it goes. And just always trying to improve my own technique and understanding and skills, and also try to be a nice source of enrichment and fun for my horses.
Perfect. Love that. And what is the one message that you would like our listeners to know from today's interview?
Definitely give clicker training a go. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's really fun. Your horse will love it. You'll both have a lot of fun, and you can teach really cool things. Almost anything that you can think up, you can teach them. It does take a bit of practice and learning. But definitely give it a go.
And speaking of giving it a go, and before we wrap up today's show, can you tell us where our listeners can find out more about you and how to get started with clicker training, and if you've got any courses that you offer, etc.?
Yeah, so my website is clickwithhorses.com, and I've got clickers and bum bags and that sort of thing, so you can the gear to get started with your clicker training. But also I do have an online course, which is quite extensive. I've got like 150 videos in there of step-by-step of how to train from a basically wild run-handled horse through to starting under saddle, some liberty and tricks, and I just keep adding to that. And it's also quite a nice community in there where we support each other on the journey, and so you can join me there in our online course, or otherwise I've also got a YouTube channel. I think if you search my name, Georgia Bruce, you'll find my YouTube channel, And I've got lots of free videos on there for getting started. So you could really watch those, and that would go a long way towards getting started.
Excellent. And I can put links to all of those in the show notes as well. We've thrown around a lot of terminology that perhaps some people, if they're not familiar with positive reinforcement, might not understand. So if you're feeling like you want to give clicker training a go, definitely check out Georgia's resources and her course. Georgia, thank you so much for coming onto the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast today and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us, particularly around clicker training. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot from today's show. So thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast. Make sure you hit the follow button so you get notified every time a new episode is released. And if you've learned even just one small thing from today's show, I would really appreciate if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or screenshot this episode and share it on social media. You can connect with me on Instagram at Amalia_horses or my website amaliadempsey.com, where you can find free resources to help you on your horsemanship journey. That's all for today. Thanks for being here. Remember to train with kindness and ride with excellence, and I'll see you in the next episode.